What's up, guys? It's me again with the sort of new thing we're doing for the LEC playoffs. Sorry, there's so many playoffs going on right now. I literally got fucking mixed up. Anyways, LEC playoffs. The 4 teams finally made it, and we'll break those down when we get to those when the next one that comes out for this. But for now, tomorrow G2 and XL play. So I have made this little matchup breakdown for us, and we're going to basically run down the team stats as a whole, and then each individual player stats between the roles, and we'll kind of use that as a way to determine who I think will win. It's kind of not that hard to figure out who I think I'm probably going to favor here, but without further ado, let's just get in so I can at least talk about it. So first, as always, there has to be precedent. So what happened during the XL and G2 regular season game? They played each other one time because there's a single round robin between these two teams, and they did not meet each other during the groups bracket, so they had one game against each other to go off of, and obviously G2 took it. G2 only lost one game to Mad Lions, so they obviously won every other game. That being said, if you look at each individual stats, you can see if there are anybody in particular to blame this game, it'll probably be the jungle and the mid laner, which we'll get to once we get to that. Obviously, Odoame didn't have a good game either. Patrick probably was the best performing player on their team, and even then he just was nothing compared to Hansel and Draven. If you look at the CS numbers, I mean, it's like everyone's completely CS gapped by a decent amount, with the exception of Limit and Mickey, just because they're support, so it doesn't really matter. Damage, obviously, again, completely gapped. I think Caps did a little less damage, just because he was not nearly as involved in fights. He was, he's playing, LeBlanc, so LeBlanc is a little harder to get a lot of that damage in. Plus, obviously, you don't need to put a lot of damage in when you have an Olaf and a Draven completely wrecking shop. So, obviously, it's just a complete diff of players. I mean, G2 got all 10 towers, obviously, because they won, and XL only got 2. You see the gold diff. It's absolutely massive. So, it's pretty easy to see how this was a pretty clean sweep for them. All right. So now that we've talked about the game as a whole between the two of them as precedent, which kind of tells us that G2 is going to win, we're now going to break down each individual player, their stats, their picks, etc., just to see where we think they're at, and it can help us sort of give us a bit of an analysis on how we think they're going to do. So, first, in the top lane, we have Broken Blade. So Broken Blade's champion pool is pretty diverse. They kind of put him on a lot of things, and he's capable of playing those things. We can see here that on the Renekton, the Sion, and the Olaf, he had a perfect KDA, which means he didn't die a single time on those champs. Obviously the Olaf, the one time he played against XL, and he didn't die, so, he's pretty good at the champs that he plays, and he obviously only lost one time, and it was on Poppy. It was 2 Mad Lions, so, oh well. If you compare the, I guess, aggression stats, you can see that their damage and KP and kill per minute is about comparable. Broken Blade has a little more damage than Odoamne, but Broken Blade is also a lot better in the solo lane. He is capable of solo killing people. I think 1v1s, Broken Blade just completely owns this entire region. So in terms of aggression, Broken Blade definitely has it. Picks, again, I think, well, we'll get to that, I guess. We'll get to that in a little bit. Comparing Odoamne's, actually, yeah, we're going to go to picks. So going to Odoamne's champion pool, he's already compared to KDAs and damage stuff. Odoamne's a little less, I don't want to say he's not flexible, but he's just put on less stuff than he's not really experimenting. The best champ obviously is the Sion. He has an extremely high KDA of 28, and he's won all 3 games he's played Sion. He has had a hard time with Cassante, and the Gnar and the Renekton are not good. The Cannon's okay. So Odoamne is a little inflexible compared to BB, but he does have a good pick on Sion, so if there's a way to focus them, it's definitely on the Sion here. So yeah, comparing next to the overall stats KDA, CS per minute, we can see that Odoamne typically has a little bit of better time farming. His CS per minute is higher, but his gold participation, his gold is a little higher, but in terms of things his KDA, his kill participation, it's a bit lower. We see that overall BB has a 5.9 and Odoamne has a 4.5, and the KP is a little bit lower. It's not really statistically significant, but it's there. And the interesting thing I think to look at here is actually the the early game laning differentials. So BB is only ahead in CS 33% of the time, while Odoame is ahead 44% of the time. Usually at 15 minutes, Odoame has a higher XP differential and CS differential, and then BB is ahead in gold at 15 minutes while Odoame is behind. So, and neither of them are first blood participants or and they've only been a first blood victim one time. So that last stat there doesn't really mean anything. But what we're seeing here is that I think Odoame is a little bit of a better laner in terms of playing safe. He's not a very aggressive player. He typically just kind of goes AFK topside and just lets like things happen. Tries to focus on catching waves and getting XP. But in terms of pushing for plating or kills or anything or assists, he isn't really that active. BB on the other hand sometimes does sort of concede a little bit and he'll lose early. But where we see BB come alive is the mid game and late game when he plays these more aggressive picks and he's able to fight really well. So I think if you really want to ask me how I break it down, I think BB is obviously the better top laner. It's not even a question. BB just comes alive in these later game fights, while Odoame may just have the early game on lockdown most of the time. Just doesn't matter when BB will completely bulldoze your team. So, yeah. So, up next is Yike versus Peach, the junglers. So, already looking at this, you can see Yike has a very small pool. I don't think that's his fault. I think they're just kind of... the drafts are a little more focused on trying to experiment with the other lanes, and Yike is just pretty good at all the junglers for the most part, so it's not like it really matters what he plays. It's kind of just how hard he beats you. So, you know, he doesn't have to really flex a lot. But he is mostly comfortable on the Maokai and the Trundle, obviously. His Maokai is honestly phenomenal, and his Trundle's a good pick against stuff like the Sejuani or the Maokai. Compare that to Peach, who is a very, I guess, flexible player. I don't really know if I want to say that because he does still lose. He has still lost a good amount of games on different champs, but he does have these sort of interesting picks like the Poppy and the Amumu, and he did also play the Wukong. The Wukong lost, but, you know, and the Viego as well. But he definitely has a flexible champion pool in the regular season. We also saw him pull out the Lee Sin in the group stage, and the Lee Sin went really well. So, you know, I think that if you just look at like flexibility alone, Peach is kind of there, but it's probably not like the most important thing that he can play stuff because the draft is not really focused on him. Next, looking at the general KDA CS gold participation, gold participation stuff, we can see that Yike has the numbers basically on everything. He has a higher KDA, higher CS per minute, higher gold, higher gold percentage, and higher KP. Yike is just a more proactive player. Peach tries to be proactive, but he isn't always successful in that proactivity. In terms of ahead in CS, they're both about the same in terms of where they are. They're pretty good early game junglers. The only difference is I think that Yike is able to have a lot better of a time getting first bloods or getting stuff going on early on, so he's able to produce a lot more gold, and so he's always ahead early. He's always ahead in gold early, he's ahead in general early. Peach can get some XP differentials, but it's not really significant enough for him. I think that Yike is just a more proactive player in the early game, and that's why he's always able to just pull ahead a lot. So, that being said, next we're talking to the sort of damage numbers here. It's obviously very clear cut, the difference here. There's like a difference of about 80 damage per minute between Yike and Peach. It does have something to do with the picks, but also it's just that Yike is a lot better, and he's a lot more... He's just moves around a lot, and he's a lot more present in team fights. Peach can kind of be there, but also not be there, so it's just, you know... Peach is okay. He had a rough start. He looks better now, but I think that Yike has just been consistently good for basically the entire split. So, if not, you know, the whole year. So, I just think that it's pretty unrealistic to say that Peach could take it over Yike in any world, because I just don't think that world is possible. Okay, now moving on to, in my personal opinion, the biggest gap in players is the mid lane, Caps versus Abidages. So, firstly, again, looking at the champs, we see that Caps is definitely a little more flexible. He's only lost one time, it was on the Nico, and admittedly that game was his fault, but he is still really flexible. He's played a lot of stuff. Caps is known for experimenting and cooking with stuff, and he's usually pretty successful. He was not very successful during MSI or last split, but generally he is known for being flexible and doing things and experimenting. And that gives him an edge, obviously, compared to Abadage, who also can cook, but he has, on the relatively like meta conventional picks, he's a little weak. The Azir is still good for him. He's good on the Azir, which is good for right now because Azir is definitely like a high prio mid laner, just because it's kind of like a normal pick and it's not really like, you know, it's just kind of a handshake pick, so people are picking it a lot and he's good at it. In terms of KDA, obviously Caps completely blows Odoamne out of the water. In terms of CS, again, Caps, same thing. Gold per minute, same thing. Caps is just always there. Interestingly enough, actually, their gold percentage is about the same, despite the fact that Caps has about 40 more gold per minute than him. KP, weirdly enough, Abadage is a little more present, and that's because we're actually going to talk about that in just a second when we talk about their damage stats and their aggression stats. So, looking at their aggression stats, we see that Abadage does a little more damage than Caps. And I think that's just because Abadage is kind of like one of the carries of their team. The focus carries of XL are Abadage and Patrick, and so obviously if Abadage is not doing damage, then he's gonna, you know, be pretty bad. But that also is sort of a testament to Abadage's late game team fighting. We'll get into a second about the early games, but Abadage's late game is honestly pretty good. I think he's a really, really good late game team fighter. It's just the early game is really, really weak. That's kind of where I think that Caps will, you know, win hard. Which again, looking at the CS and gold early game stats, we see that Caps is always ahead in CS. He's actually every game that he's been ahead in CS, he has won. Interestingly enough, I don't think that means anything, but it's just an interesting little coincidence. CS differential is huge, gold differential is huge, and XP differential is really big. So obviously, like, I mean, it's a lot. I mean, Caps always wins lane, basically. He constantly, you know, he's a consistent force. He's basically been involved in 2 first bloods, which if you look compared to Abadage, it's like he's been first blooded 3 times. He's only gotten 1 first blood participation, so, you know, Caps is a little more early game focused, but he's also capable of doing really good in the team fights. Even though he's not necessarily, I would say, as much of a carry factor as Abadage, he's still definitely a carry factor, and he 100% wins lane. And so I think that if you let G2 win early, then it's just kind of GG. They can't lose from behind, so, or they can't lose from ahead, rather. So realistically, like, this should be the biggest gap. I think it'll be a pretty big stomp for Caps here. Alrighty, next is Hansama versus Patrick. So, firstly, champs. Hansama not nearly as variable or as varied, I guess, as Patrick. He does have the Kog'Maw, which is definitely the best thing that they have right now. It's kind of their Exodia pick. But he's still pretty good with what he plays. They don't really have to draft around. Hansama's consistent. That's what I'm trying to say. He can play what he wants. He's been able to play some of the stuff we saw him on the group stage, playing, I believe it was the Ashe. So, you know, and obviously the Kai'Sa's good too. So Hansama's not really a worry for me. His champ pool, he's good with everything. So, you know, he's a good player. Compared to Patrick has a little more of a conventional ADC pool. He's also added the Kai'Sa in the group stage, and he is definitely the carry for this team. But he does sometimes get picked off, and he can be a losing factor if he does kind of get picked early. Next, looking at the aggression stats, obviously Hansama has higher damage per minute, but the damage percentage and the kill plus per minute are about the same, so they're about equal in that place. I think it just is overall that G2 just completely stomps, so obviously his damage will be high, but his damage will be higher, but his damage percentage will still basically be about the same. An interesting little thing to look at here is actually the solo kill for Patrick. Patrick has gotten a solo kill. What I'm about to say is kind of contradictory. It doesn't really matter. I think that being solo killed by an ADC doesn't really say anything about the AD carry. It can, but not really nearly as much as it is that person who got solo killed. And I honestly cannot tell you who got solo killed by Patrick, but whoever it is, I fucking salute you, man. You're complete shit. Anyways, that sort of aside. Looking at the early game gold stats, we look at Hansama, constantly ahead in gold. He's a lane winner. He wins lane. His CS differential's higher, gold difference higher, XP difference higher. Patrick can sometimes is not a constant force of winning lane. We also see that Hansama's gone to first blood basically 4 times. So obviously Patrick is not really winning lane, but he is capable of team fighting really well, and that's kind of where we see Patrick flourish. And then lastly, looking at the general stats, obviously Hansama's KDA, CS per minute, gold per minute is all higher. KP and gold percentage are a bit lower, but I think that's just again because Patrick is the carry for XL, so if he's not like dominating in terms of gold and KP, then it's kind of a problem. That being said, I think Hansama obviously takes this. It's a pretty easy path for him. I mean, the difference again here is pretty big. So, you know, I think when it comes down to it, Hansama is just way better. And lastly, we have the supports. So obviously these stats are a little bit different because supports some stats don't really matter as a support. So, you know, we want to focus on that. So firstly, Mickey. Mickey is definitely on these more facilitator picks. We've seen him play the Braum twice, Nami twice, Milio twice, and Lulu 1 time. Braum I just meant to say, I said twice, but I meant to say 4 times. But yeah, he's basically playing a lot of these facilitator picks that kind of peel and focus on basically letting Hansama do his thing. And I think that in particular, that is a really good pool to have against Limit. Limit obviously plays very aggressive picks like the Nautilus and the Rakan and the Leona. He does play the Milio and the Yuumi, but I think that when it comes to draft, I don't know if Milio will have nearly as high of a priority or if it will even be let through, honestly. I think that in terms of picks, Mickey X definitely has the upper hand to Limit. KDAs, Mickey is obviously higher. Gold higher, gold percentage, and KP are a bit about the same, and same thing with CS per minute, doesn't really matter for your support. Gold differential, Mickey is a bit higher, XP is a bit lower, but I mean that's just supports, they really don't matter. Again, first blood participation, Mickey X and Hansama are always winning bot lane. In comparison, Limit, they're not really winning bot lane early. Lastly, looking at the map, their vision score, Limit has a slightly higher vision score. We see that in terms of vision, Limit has Mickey X winning there, so that is good because of that is sort of give them an advantage in team fighting, because I think Limit will allow XL to see where G2 can be, look up from these flanks or TPs, things that allow G2 to get the upper hand in team fights that they always have with late game and mid game team fighting. And overall, I think, you know, that will probably be one of the biggest factors, I think, if XL wants to take a game, is being able to see G2 coming and not let G2 play their game. And so I think Limit is definitely, with his vision score, is definitely defining an important factor, but I still think that ultimately Mickey X will probably be the better support here. It just feels like kind of unrealistic to say that, you know, he's a lot better. So yeah. So overall, that being said, with everyone's stats compiled and talked about and discussed, I do think G2 will take this as a 3-1. You'd be asking yourself, well, why isn't it 3-0? Well, I think XL can take a game. What I'm saying about Limit is honestly true. I think that there can be one game where XL does not allow G2 to play their game, and it's probably going to be early on in the series. I think that XL may try and take advantage of G2 not having to play for a while. I think XL probably want this a little bit more than G2, so they'll probably be a bit hungrier. G2 is a bit of a team that will rest on their laurels a little bit if they are in a good spot. Not to say that they will, I'm just saying that they have in the past. So if XL really, really wants this, then they will take a game, probably through some really good vision playing and some good drafting. And hopefully they can pull it back together, maybe pray for a G2 throw. Because I do think ultimately the path for G2 to win this is definitely through the early game. If they just stomp early game and completely steamroll XL and don't give them the chance to do anything, and kind of just let make XL play their game, then G2 wins. If XL does not let G2 play their game, then XL can pull a win off, maybe. I think in terms of hands, G2 still have better hands. I just think that it may come down to some trickery from XL to pull up a game, but I think that it is still possible. I don't think they can win a series though, but I think that they can at least win a game. So that being said, I won't be too long with the outro here. This is sort of a new thing. I'll try and do this for the remainder of the series. I will definitely do it for Fnatic and Heretics, but in terms of the remainder, I'll have to see just if it's possible. that being said, thanks again for watching. If you have any opinions on this, if you think XL can win it, please tell me, because I'd like to know how. I'd like to talk about it. If you'd like to talk about how T1 lost to fucking OK Bro, then let's talk about that, because I think that's hilarious. But that's another aside. I'm being stupid. Anyways, just like, comment, subscribe. If you have any thoughts, comment them, and I'll see you guys in the next one of these, so peace out.